All right, we are on chapter 10, Losing My Son. And so this completes numerologically a denarius, the ending of a sequence here. In chapter 11, then we'll begin a new chapter of my life, a very different one. This is my mother's house in 2013 at 428 South 93rd Place in Mesa, Arizona, where I lived for 8 years. And yes, I'm still driving the same car. I returned from Boulder to move in with my mother, but only because my step grandfather had died the year before. She and my brother claimed that for that entire year his ghost was haunting her house, and she could hear his footsteps going down the hall at night and would sometimes hear a door slam. Out in the garage where he had been living, there was a television set on, which he used to watch Fox News every night, and some nights she would go out there and find it turned on. Later, I inherited this same television, and it never once turned itself on while I owned it. Also, he had a collection of flashlights lined up on his desk, and sometimes she would find them switched on. I remember having a dream shortly after he died, in which he appeared to me looking lost and confused. I was trying to point him in the right direction, but he seemed like a zombie. Later, a medium told me that he was in some kind of limbo and was indeed haunting the house. Nothing in the way of obvious haunting went on when I moved back, but the house did seem to be cursed with bad luck. Things were always burning out, short circuiting, or failing electrically. I had no idea how long I would be living there, but my mother's health was beginning to go downhill. Her heart had been in permanent atrial fib for many years due to drinking and smoking. She had diabetes and was obese, but she didn't take any of it seriously and routinely sent my brother and I to the store to acquire all kinds of sugary foods for her, such as cakes, pies, ice cream, etc. And there was no arguing with her. It was either her way or the highway, and my brother and I learned to adapt to her mood swings. She was taking approximately 15 pills a night for her various ailments, and we knew those pills were poisoning her body. We made bets on how long she had left to live, and they were pretty accurate as it turned out. One thing you learn as you get older: future events cast their shadows backwards in time. One day she fell while getting dressed. Fortunately, I was home that time and I heard her yelling and ran into her bedroom to find her lying on the floor, unable to get up. I got down and wrestled her to her feet, but I then realized that someone needed to be living there with her at all times, and so I canceled all plans for moving out. Instead, I called my brother, who was living with a friend at the time, and told him, "You better move in here with us. If she had fallen and I wasn't there, who knows what might have happened." He agreed, and so he moved in with us, and we lived with our mother for the next few years until she died in just exactly the same way. One night, she fell when neither one of us was home and suffocated to death. But meanwhile, in the garage, I was getting seriously busy with my career now that I didn't have to worry about keeping a roof over my head. As soon as I returned, I set to work on finishing The Age of Catastrophe, which flowed very quickly and easily out of me over the next 6 months. I published it in 2012 with the same publisher that had put out The New Media Invasion in 2011, but the terms were not good. Most aspiring writers don't realize how difficult it is to make money at all in publishing. Publishers normally take 90% of an author's royalties and leave writers with only 10%, which usually amounts to receiving one miserable royalty check per year for a meager sum. McFarland was putting out the books as trade paperbacks that were prohibitively expensive. My Facebook friends were complaining about the expense, but there was nothing I could do. Also, I was getting tired of publishers making me change things in the book that I didn't want changed, such as book titles, chapter titles, etc. My publisher, Prager Greenwood, had insisted that I include a chapter on Heath Ledger in Dead Celebrities Living Icons, and though I thought Ledger had been a good actor, I didn't think he quite qualified as an icon and didn't belong in the same company with Elvis Presley, Walt Disney, or Princess Diana. I had heard that Amazon had acquired a new self-publishing division called CreateSpace. I decided that if it was connected with Amazon, then it would at least have more cachet than a typical vanity press. I spent the entirety of 2012 writing essays on how to understand contemporary art, as I was teaching myself how to understand it. So I sat down and wrote an essay on the life and works of Jackson Pollock, an artist whom I had always liked. When it was finished, I set it aside, deciding that it wasn't very good. So I let it sit for an entire year before I went back to it and reread it and then decided that it actually worked very well. Next, I wrote an essay on Mark Rothko, an artist whom I had never cared much for. But as I went through his entire oeuvre in a catalog raisonné, I began to see how his art had evolved and what it signified as it cycled through bland repetitions of modernist iconotypes and then gradually melted them down and liquefied them into his famous luminous squares. I realized then that Rothko had been doing the same thing in the New York art world as Derrida had been doing with his deconstruction. In his first great essay, Structure, Sign, and Play in the Discourse of the Human Sciences, Derrida announced that there was an ontological absence at the center of Western being now. And I realized that that absence was exactly what Rothko was visualizing in his vacant squares, which once used to contain iconotypes, such as the crucifixion or the Annunciation to Mary, etc. So I coined the term semiotic vacancy. After finishing the book, which I entitled Art After Metaphysics, I decided to roll the dice and self-publish it on CreateSpace. I had to pay them about $700 to design the cover and the interior layout of the manuscript. The terms were much better than traditional publishing because CreateSpace takes only 40% of your royalties, and they pay you every month. From that point on, I knew I was done with traditional publishing, and a landslide of creativity then ensued over the next 8 years. I published something like 20 books during that period of my life. I gathered up all my film reviews from the website Cinema Discourse and published that as a volume entitled Post-Classic Cinema. I then taught myself how to use InDesign so that I could now design the book covers and the interior proofs myself and didn't have to pay CreateSpace a dime. If you do all the work yourself, they publish it for you for free. I then gathered up all my Amazon book reviews and polished them up and put that collection out as a book called Thanks, Collected Book Reviews from Joseph Campbell to Deleuze and Guattari. Then I wrote a series of essays trying to understand the origins and evolution of the graphic novel in a book called Giant Humans, Tiny Worlds. I then went back and resurrected two previously abandoned projects, Rage and the Word, and the earlier volumes studying the evolution of the superhero that had bifurcated into dead celebrities, a book which was entitled Gods and Heroes of the Media Age, and so forth. It was an incredibly productive time for me. And in October of 2011, I founded a new media genre, the YouTube literary exegesis. Everyone is doing this nowadays, but back then nobody was doing it. While in Boulder, I had been wrestling with trying to understand Heidegger and was making no progress. I went onto YouTube thinking that surely there must be a professor or someone on there with videos explaining how to understand Heidegger, but there was nothing other than a few dry interviews with Hubert Dreyfus, a complete rambling bore. What a mess he makes out of Heidegger. In October of 2011, I was rereading Arnold Toynbee's classic book, A Study of History, and I decided to make a video discussing the ideas in that book. But reading Toynbee made me nostalgic for Oswald Spengler, so I decided to get out my copy of The Decline of the West and reread it. I then made a chapter-by-chapter video series on how to understand Spengler, something like 60 videos in all. The response was very enthusiastic, so at that point I decided to go back to Heidegger and help rectify the missing videos I had been looking for in Boulder. I wanted to help people understand Heidegger, who I thought was impenetrable, so I proceeded to make a long series of videos on Heidegger. I then spent the next years going through all of the great German idealist philosophers from Kant, Fichte, Schelling, Hegel, and Schopenhauer, book by book, chapter by chapter. Most of those are audio files only, which I loaded into Google Play as albums. I then did a series on Deleuze and Guattari's modern masterpiece, A Thousand Plateaus. A wise decision because it led me to my next girlfriend, Mary Church, who became the ISIS in my life and restored my virility and made me feel like a man again. And there it is. 63 Spangler videos in all, both volumes, chapter by chapter. It's an epic. Um, hmm. and then I finally decided to wrestle with Derrida, another thinker I was never able to get anywhere with. But now I discovered why. You can't understand Derrida without having gone through Heidegger first. Derrida began his career as a Heidegger and Husserl scholar, and now when I sat down to read of grammatology, it was lucid and crystal clear. A whole different experience than when I had tried and failed to understand the book many years before. I now began to realize that there was no philosophical book, no matter how difficult, that I couldn't figure out. I was in an agon with myself, absorbing all of these books and conquering them. It was the literary equivalent of climbing K2. I made hundreds of videos over the next few years, and now, as of this writing, there are over 1,000 videos on my YouTube channel. Once again, I had given up on sex and relationships with women in order to concentrate and focus intensely on making a creative explosion happen. I was, mostly, though not entirely, celibate during those 8 years, Venus cycle in astrology, living in my mother's garage. But I was perfectly happy being a father to my son, and at that point, it was the only relationship that mattered to me. The divorce was still amicable, and we spent the next 2 years flying my son back and forth from Boulder to Phoenix. It was working very well, and it was an arrangement that I was happy with. We had finally decided to take our son out of school and simply homeschool him using an online education program. Her employer, fortunately, allowed her to bring him to work with her in her office, where he sat in a cubicle and did his schoolwork all day long. His grades were now improving, and he was much, much happier. Public school had been a nightmare for him, but now that was over. She would send him out to me for the entire summer, and then I would homeschool him all summer long. He was incredibly bright, and we just sailed right through his curriculum. He was good at everything and got straight A's from that point on. Science was his favorite subject, and he was addicted to watching science documentaries on Netflix. I was spoiling him as much as I could. Every bit of money that I received from doing proofreading and editing jobs I spent on him. I bought him a computer and a bicycle, then a small electric mini bike that he loved riding around the neighborhood. My brother and I always accompanied him on our bikes, and the three of us would go cruising around the neighborhood near Superstition Mountain, where my mother lived. My son adored my brother. The two of them got along very well, as my brother is a video game freak, and he and my son would play video games for hours, screaming and laughing at each other's antics. We would have water balloon fights in the backyard in 110-degree heat. We would spray each other with the hose and giggle uncontrollably. It was like being a kid all over again. We had so much fun. The three of us, together with my mother, would then go on various trips around Arizona. We took him to visit the Hohokam Big House in Casa Grande, which was actually an ancient astronomical observatory. We took him to Montezuma's Castle, which are the remains of a cliff-dwelling people, and we went to the Mogollon Rim to camp out in the forest. And of course, we took him to the Grand Canyon. On the way there was a spooky little incident that caught my attention. We were on the way to the North Rim. All the tourists go to the South Rim, which is just a postcard image, whereas the North Rim is way more spectacular. But you have to make a longer drive to get there coming from southern Arizona. We had stopped for the night at a place called the Vermilion Cliffs, where there is a small, cozy motel rather. We were just winding down for the evening, and I was on the phone with the ex, giving her the daily report. My ex at the time had been speaking to a psychic, and whenever she would tell me about what the psychic would tell her, that her angels wanted her to do this or her spirit guides that, because it usually involved doing something against me, I would always roll my eyes. I had already discovered in Boulder the reality of the afterlife through watching scores of near death experience videos on YouTube. It didn't take me long to realize that these people were describing the same reality and that the soul does indeed survive the death of the body. I had realized that God was a real being of some sort and that reincarnation was a fact. So I had already accepted all of that, but for some reason I still regarded psychics and mediums as kooks. I didn't take them seriously at all, but I later learned differently. So on the phone that night, my ex said, my psychic just told me that she would send two protective spirits to watch over our son. Once again, I rolled my eyes and said, yep, okay, good night. Once I got off the phone, however, I was there scrolling through my text messages in the outdoor twilight when I noticed that there was an open doorway in one of the motel rooms right in front of me. My son was playing on the ground at that moment, and I looked up just then to see two huge grayish-white husky dogs, twins, crawl out of the open doorway, cross the dirt to my son, and then both of them sat down right beside him. My jaw dropped. I called my ex back and reported the phenomenon, and she said, yep, told you. My attitude toward psychics began to alter from that point on. So everything was going beautifully until the summer of 2013. My ex had a new man in her life at that point, which I didn't care anything about at all. I was relieved, actually, that that door was finally closed. But this individual, some businessman type shallow goofball, perceived me as a threat, and he encouraged her to cut me out of the picture, as the following actions were entirely uncharacteristic of her. June rolled around, and we had big plans for the kid. We were going to take him here, take him there, etc. I got on the phone with the ex and asked when he was coming. My brother, my mother, and I were all very excited to have him, but on the phone, my ex told me that she would not be sending him out to me this year, but to summer camp instead. This was absolutely incomprehensible. I reminded her that we had already tried sending him to summer camp once before and that it had been a complete disaster. But she was insistent. I asked when she would be sending him out, and she replied, maybe for Thanksgiving. We'll see. Now, wait a minute here, I said. I have a legal right to see my son for a certain number of days every year. I have the divorce papers. I'll dig them up and see what the exact number is, but you have to send him out here. I have legal rights. Go ahead, she said. Get legal then. And she hung up on me. I was astonished. I dug up the divorce papers, and it did indeed say that I had a right to see my son 176 days out of each year. We then got into a fight over Gmail, back and forth. I lost my temper and began cussing her out. She stopped replying to my emails. I tried calling the house and left a message, but there was no response. This was all very unusual and perplexing. A few days went by, and then I got a knock on the front door. When I answered it, a process server handed me a restraining order. It said I had to appear in court on June 26th, of all days, my birthday, in order to defend myself. You fucking bitch, I thought. What a complete stab in the back. What was really happening, though, was that she was growing more and more jealous of my relationship with my son. Every summer, my son would return back to her with glowing reviews about how dad bought me this, how dad took me there, dad, dad, dad. I was a big hit with him as usual, and as usual, she wasn't. She was a drag, always yelling at him, and on occasion even hitting him. I never spanked my son. I'm completely philosophically opposed to it. I had been a victim of child abuse, and I know how badly it messes kids up. I slapped my son's face precisely once for back-talking to me publicly and loudly in a McDonald's, but it messed me up so badly I'll never forget it. But that was it. I never hit him again, ever. And now here she was on this restraining order, making what she very well knew were fake claims and lies about me. She was trying to portray me as an abusive asshole. She claimed I had access to my step-grandfather's gun collection, which was also a lie, since my mother had long ago made my step-grandfather get rid of all of his guns. Lie after lie after lie after lie. So I flew up to the Boulder courthouse to defend myself. I was unable to sleep at all the night before, and I had made the mistake of taking Unison pills to get me to sleep, but all they did was make me drowsy and dulled my thinking. When I went into the courthouse, I saw that she had a lawyer. No, wait a minute, I thought. Nobody told me I was supposed to bring a lawyer. I had thought that this was just going to be an informal hearing during which we could negotiate a schedule for me to see my son. But I knew the moment I saw the lawyer that I was doomed. And her family were there to support her, her mother and her father, who had now found yet another of their son-in-laws to scapegoat. What complete and total cowards. And of course, the lawyer read out my Gmails and I was done for. The board judge, who wasn't even listening as he had another appointment to get to, simply handed me a new permanent restraining order against my ex, and I could not see my son for 4 months, after which I would have to make third-party visitations. Fuck you, I thought to myself. Apparently, in far leftist Boulder, men have no rights whatsoever. It has been hijacked by the woke liberal mentality that prevails there, in which it is assumed that all men are guilty before proven innocent, and I had no proof of my innocence. When I returned to my mother's house, I got on the phone to my abusive stepfather and explained the situation to him. I told him that he needed to pay for me to get a lawyer because he owed it to me for the shit he had put me and my brother through as children. He said he would help out, so he started giving me money to pay for a lawyer. But lawyers always want more and more money. They'll fight for your legal rights, all right, but only so long as you have plenty of money to pay them. And they always think of excuses to charge you for more and more things, like postage stamps, for instance, or paper clips for your documents. How spiritually unevolved and degenerate a soul must be to voluntarily incarnate as a lawyer. Dante would have invented a special circle of hell for them. So then we arranged for me to have a supervised visit with my son in Boulder. I was to visit with him while a psychiatrist watched us interact. A complete fucking charade. When my son and I began talking, we went right into particle physics. He started telling me about all the properties of found particles that he had learned about from watching Netflix science documentaries. We went back and forth, excitedly describing the physics of Einsteinian relativity and quantum mechanics to each other. After the session was over, the psychiatrist looked dumbfounded. Is this how you and your son always interact? He said. I said, yes, absolutely. Well, obviously, there was nothing wrong here, and so he wrote out a glowing report for my lawyer to give to the judge. Her lawyer, however, was a man. So she then proceeded to fire him and then found a man-hating female lawyer to raise all kinds of objections to me. Interesting gender switch there. I was a this and a that, and could I provide proof of this or that situation, etc. But there were too many objections, and I was out of money. My stepfather, after giving me about $15,000, told me that that was his limit, the cheap-ass miser that he was. That was it. I had been beaten by a woman who had run a prostitution agency just a few years before, a woman who routinely hit her own child, and now I was a scapegoat for all her sins. My son was 10 years old when I last saw him in 2013.